What's going on, everybody? Today we will be doing a watercolor landscape painting tutorial. We are painting on a 9 by 12 inch sheet of watercolor paper using synthetic brushes, and the paints along with the paper and all the materials are listed in the description box for you. We're starting off with a very thin wash of cerulean blue. The paper was soaked in water about 5 to 10 minutes prior to painting, so the paper itself is still wet, and that's going to be an important part of this process, as the paper that I'm using is not that expensive. It's not as expensive as the Arches paper. So this type of paper is really useful for sketches, studies, quick paintings that you want to do on the fly. I'm toning the top of the sky a little bit of an off gray bluish color. Now with watercolor, it's very important for you to be decisive about your washes, because you don't want to do more washes than you need to, especially for something like a very plain sky like what we're doing here. The finished result is not going to have a very detailed looking sky or anything like that. So now we're going in with our first wash for the trees, and I'm using Viridian and burnt sienna with a little bit of black. Again, the materials are listed in the description box for you, and we're putting little crisscross type zigzag diagonal shaped brush strokes, as you see there. Just drawing with the brush. There's no need to draw this out with a pencil. In fact, I would suggest to just go with the flow, so to speak. With watercolor, you want to work light washes up to dark washes. So I'm using the same wash for the or same value wash for the trees as I am for the pond, or the grassy areas in the pond. Now, what I meant by going with the flow with this type of watercolor drawing, is that the immediacy of watercolor is something that will help you with your other materials. Suppose that you also work with a slower material like oil paint, or with say pastels, soft or oil pastels. Those require, or not require, but they're actually better if you take more time. Watercolor is fun in the sense that you can be quick, decisive. You can make a pretty decent picture in a short amount of time because of the fluidity of the paint. Now we're going in with a deep red and black. Still, you can see the paint is quite wet. A tip here is when it dries, you see how dark it looks right there? So once it starts to dry, it's actually not gonna look that dark until we have several layers on the painting. And you can go with horizontal, vertical, or diagonal brush strokes. Your very classical landscape painter is probably not going to go with either vertical or horizontal brush strokes. They will probably go with something more or less along a diagonal. But you can see the abstract composition here for the landscape is already established. This is the big picture, and the overall composition, will not change very much from this point on. Another useful tip with watercolor is know how much water you're using per wash. I'm not using that much, but I'm using enough for it to drip down the paper. The paper itself is on an easel that is angled at about probably 80 degrees. It's not perfectly straight, nor is it laid flat. However, if you want to do a very broad wash with very thin paint, then it would be best to lay the paper down as you apply the wash. But if you keep track of the consistency of your paint, you can predict how much it's going to drip, say about 1 centimeter to 2 centimeters of drip per plane, and that's okay. That goes along with the aesthetic of the watercolor that I have grown to appreciate. Now you see here dark bluish, so it's black and cerulean blue, and it's going from right to left as you see that wash. As the brush runs out of paint, this is a very important layer because it's going to be the middle value range for the shadows on the pond. When we finish the painting, there really won't be too much of the pond except for some reflections in the light along with the grass. And you can see the drip is about 1 centimeter to 2 centimeters. It's not totally dripping. And this is a really fun and easy watercolor painting. This could easily be your very first watercolor painting if you want to follow along with this. It requires a lot less accuracy in terms of linear drawing than, say, a portrait. Now we're drawing a little horizon line for the land. So I very much enjoy the watercolor aesthetic, especially in the beginning stages. You can see how it starts to have that cloudy fog-like appearance, and when we finish the painting, it'll almost be as opaque as an oil painting. So many different properties can be explored with watercolor. As you can probably tell, the bottom right section of the painting, which was once almost as black as the brush, has now faded. So again, we're going to do the same thing. The brush stroke running out of paint from left to right. It's a very satisfying thing to let the brush run out of paint. And what makes this possible is the fact that the watercolor paper was soaked in water for about a minute, not more than a minute. I'd say 45 seconds. It was in a tub of warm water, in a tub of lukewarm water for about 45 seconds before it was taken out, and then let to rest for a couple minutes, and then taped to the board. So the paper remains wet for about 40 minutes to 50 minutes, which is the time span of the entire painting. And if you are going to be doing plein air paintings outdoor, this is a really useful method for you, but make sure to bring water, enough water to soak the paper You don't want to be traveling to a location and realize you don't have any water to prepare the paper. You could also just spray it with a spray bottle. That'll work just fine as well. Now you can see the drip, about a centimeter. Not 2 centimeters anymore, about a centimeter. And here we get to explore the brushwork side of the watercolor landscape. It is something that I will explore more and more, but you see the flat brush looks really nice when you see there's a little blade, I guess, of the brush. Even that little partition on the brush. See how we can explore little zigzags, crisscross brush strokes. And now we're starting to create planes. Every plane change is indicated by a change in either color or value. Now we're adding the second layer to the bottom right. It'll have maybe another 4 layers added to it, but this one is more green. And I was mixing up a dark green, Viridian black and burnt sienna. Now you see how the layers start to get darker. Exploring the flat brush, the brush strokes that we get from that. Pretty neat. There's something about landscape that requires a little bit of an eye for design, in the sense that you are not copying what you're looking at explicitly, but what you're doing is you're interpreting visual information just like with a portrait, but with a little more leeway towards the likeness. So you get to kind of be a little more expressive with the way that you simplify shapes. And I'm going with kind of almost like a tile, up and down kind of tile, and utilizing the drippiness of the watercolor. And I added a little bit of red for the pond, the dark shapes in the pond. Red, black, and blue will create kind of like a dark brownish purple. You can think about artists of the past, in particular oil painters that used watercolor for landscapes, in particular plein air paintings. They would work pretty fast. You could tell that the painting was done in under an hour or so. And there's a lot of the watercolor aesthetic that goes into it. Think about artists such as Mr. John Singer Sargent. Think about his watercolor landscapes and even portraits. Very quick and expressive, an excellent exercise to explore your eye for design, your aesthetics, and how you interpret information. And that'll carry on to your more finished work. But considering it as an exercise is in no way uh, demeaning or minimizing the beauty of watercolor. It is equally difficult to create a magnificent watercolor that takes 41 minutes. It's equally as difficult to do that as it is to create uh, a good composition portrait figure painting or something like that that say took 4 hours. It's just as complicated, but in a shorter time span. As you see, the depth is being added as we increase the value range. And we're looking at a focal point that seems to be kind of the middle left of the painting as we're moving from left to right. And your landscapes should always incorporate some kind of focal point, but here's an interesting thought. Try to be spontaneous with it. Sometimes if you are spontaneous with your drawing, your subconscious does a lot of the work for you. And activating the subconscious in your drawing, and yes, I'm going to call it drawing because painting, I do consider it to be drawing just with color, is being able to do it with your subconscious shows a level of mastery over your material that's really when the fun begins. When the fun really begins. Now I went a little dark with that brush stroke and I noticed it immediately when I was painting it. So I went in with something lighter and just so happened to consider it a happy accident because I saw those brush strokes, in particular in that little weird V-shaped partition on the flat brush. And I decided that might be kind of fun to create some effects with it. So I went in with a little bit of a light raw sienna color into the dark. Again, the materials are listed for you, but the color that I used was basically like a Chinese white mixed with a yellow ochre to create a light raw sienna type color. The colors on my palette are pre-mixed using tubes of paint, and then I let them dry in order to create my own custom watercolor pan palette. But you could just use any. I would suggest a pan palette for watercolor. You can use any watercolor pan set. You might as well just buy one for landscape or buy one for portrait. Nice thing about them is they are really cheap compared to something like oil paint or even acrylic. Acrylic's getting kind of expensive too. Mind you, this entire video is real time, so I don't edit anything out of this video. It's basically a one and done recording session. So everything that I tell you is in real time. So it can be this quick. Now you see right above the trees on the right side of the painting that little bit of cerulean blue from the initial wash that we had before. Really important that you are decisive with these washes. you're allowed to be a little bit indecisive with the smaller planes as we are starting to break the shapes down into smaller planes. You can see there's less water on the brush. So you see that it's not dripping quite as much as in the beginning. But it will still drip, of course. Not as much. And we want it to drip a little bit. It all adds to the watercolor aesthetic. And preparing the paper ahead of time, oddly enough, if you soak the watercolor paper for about 45 seconds in lukewarm water and wait, I'd say 2 to 3 minutes before taping it onto a drawing board, somehow the paper doesn't buckle as much as if you say prepare the watercolor paper by letting it sit for an hour in the water. I've tried that before, and it buckled a lot. It didn't buckle that much when I painted onto the paper wet. Dry. If I didn't wet the paper and I just painted onto it as it was, it didn't buckle that much, but it did buckle more, a lot more than this method did. So consider that a very helpful part of the tutorial, is just a preparation of the paper. It's so easy. Just set your tub, just fill your tub up with a little bit of lukewarm water. Make sure the tub is clean, of course. And then just put the paper in for about 45 seconds. Take it out. Let it sit on a towel. Let it sit on a bath towel for about 3 minutes or so. Then tape it onto your drawing board, and you're good to go. Materials wise, it's so cost efficient. Mind you, an oil painting of this size, to have a surface as smooth as the paper that we're working on, you're going to end up paying, for a 9x12 surface, you're going to end up paying probably 10 times what you would pay for the watercolor. However, it doesn't make the watercolor any less significant than the oil painting. Now we're adding light over the dark, and yes, you can do that with watercolor. Just don't put a ton of it. With watercolor, you don't want to paint thick impasto like you would with an oil painting, because the watercolor will crack, and that is kind of a problem. But it is really hard to put that much paint onto the paper, especially if the paper is wet. So you don't really have to worry about it unless you're putting a tube of paint type thickness onto a watercolor surface. Now this is fun to do, especially in the middle values. Adding light over top of the dark helps to create more control in the middle value range as you start to add more planes to create further depth in your painting. And now that we're more than halfway through with the painting, I also want to, again, tell you how useful this is for something like a plein air painting, because you're able to move with the quickness, and of course studying different effects of the brush and how much water to use, how to prepare the paper, different layering methods such as the one we're using today. It's really helpful because if you're doing something, say a plein air painting in the morning or in the evening, the light is going to change kind of drastically. And that can happen as well in the afternoon, but whatever time of day you're painting, you're gonna have to create an image within less than an hour. So to be able to do that in less than an hour, you really want a material that allows you to layer kind of quickly. Now, of course, with oil painting, it's totally possible to do everything wet on wet. It's been done for centuries. But with watercolor, it's really nice to be able to have this sense of immediacy that you don't really get with something like oil paint. Nonetheless, it's still a really good material to at least consider to explore, especially if you're going to be traveling. It's really easy to travel with watercolor materials versus something like oil painting materials. Even acrylic is going to be a little bit more difficult to travel than watercolor. So at this stage, not a lot of stuff is going on. We're going in with small planes at a time, and I could fast forward this, but I'm gonna just let it play in real time, just so you see. Not a lot of big changes are gonna happen uh, in a pretty long period of time, so we're just going and changing one little plane at a time. You can see the paint is getting a little bit thicker. So we're putting a little bit more depth into that shadow. Like I mentioned before, with watercolor, you want to layer lighter and then eventually darker. Lighter into darker values such that it's easier to let the layers build. And the lighter values that you have in the beginning, you can use kind of as your midtones or your lights for the trees. So we're definitely enjoying the flat brush, the brush stroke from the flat brush. You see, we let the kind of the used up texture of the brush create its own kind of unique little brush strokes. It is not an expensive brush, by the way. It's just a cheap brush from Michael's, a cheap flat brush. You want to think about planes with the trees just like you would planes on the face if you were painting a portrait. Light and shadow, of course, is the most important. As you can see, we pushed the dark for the shadows even further. You always want to consider doing that, even if it's not that easy to see on your reference or if you're out painting on location. Sometimes trees can be a little ambiguous and you can't quite see the light and shadow delineations clearly. So that's a perfect time to really kind of invent it. Make sure that that structure is there so that the painting reads from a distance. Now we're going to be going in with a little bit of a yellow ochre, a light raw sienna type color, and we're using this on the edge of the trees, and this is going to be part of the little branches that you see. Not so much a tapping fashion, a uniform tapping fashion, but more just a kind of a sporadic little, I guess, randomized brushstrokes. You don't want the brushstrokes to be overly symmetrical. So try as much as you can to create asymmetry with your little branches and twigs that you paint in the contour of the trees. Now, obviously, this is not going to be a very detailed landscape painting, as I want to be able to demonstrate landscape painting in watercolor, and I think this time frame is probably the best kind of time frame for this type of painting. So it's just enough time to put in planes and different values, but not so much time where we end up rendering every little twig. And we're pushing the light and shadow delineation. See here, it's not so much a uniform tapping motion, but more kind of evenly spread out. We're letting these brushstrokes be evenly spread out. And there's less water on the brush now, just enough water to get the paint to move. And I recommend using a pan palette, because using the tubes will kind of make it so that you use more paint than you need to, so you may end up going too thick too early. So this is the kind of thickness that I would use in the ending stages of a watercolor painting, not so much in the beginning. And as I was talking about in the beginning, you want to think about the aesthetics of the painting, especially for a landscape. The landscape needs to read its best from a distance, arguably even further away than a portrait or any kind of figurative painting. And that's because there's more significance in the abstract nature of a landscape because of the way that they are displayed in galleries or in home settings or even in commercial settings. They're often seen from a distance, kind of displaying a sort of feeling or emotion. Some people can look at landscape paintings and even hear the birds or feel the wind, and not necessarily for how realistic the painting is in terms of details, but kind of the aesthetic of it all. The brushstrokes, the colors, the patterns, the designs, the way that lines kind of intersect with other lines, things like that. That's what we mean by the aesthetic. So even in these stages, you want to consider the aesthetic of the brushstroke to be something that you are actively thinking about, how each small brushstroke kind of interacts with the other small brushstrokes, so that the design is well thought out in the big picture, but also in the small picture. And that's the same yellow ochre raw sienna type color. Utilizing those flat brush strokes. And around this time, the paper does kind of start to uh, it allows you to paint wet onto dry because the paper has somewhat started to dry. So that lighter raw sienna color, you can see we can use now to paint in some highlights, as long as we don't paint very thick. As I mentioned before, if you let the tube paints dry on your palette, you'll notice that they'll start to crack. But because of the nature of the watercolor and how thin it applies, it's really not possible to paint thick enough to crack the painting unless you put a tube right out of the tube color on the paper, which is not something I would recommend. And even the color can harmonize in an aesthetic sense where the highlights, though they are different colors in certain areas, like say the water versus the foliage on the trees or the grass, they're still similar enough as to create a type of color harmony. In an impressionistic style landscape, you push the color of the light in relation to the color of the shadow more for kind of a color impressionist type painting. But for this kind of aesthetic, it's more of a limited palette look, which can create more harmony and more balance because there's not so many colors competing with one another. And the dark reflections of the water have a little bit of red in them. And see how we're still utilizing the brush strokes, the kind of jagged, used up nature of the flat brush to create some nice effects. But the painting is almost done. As you see, we have built all the way up to these darker values, and when it dries, it will dry a tad bit lighter than this, but not much. So there aren't that many layers on here, maybe less than 7, but you can see those few layers are enough to build these dark values. So the tutorial is winding down at this point. So we've got about a minute or so left. So let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this tutorial. I know it's been a while since I've uploaded a pre-recorded video on YouTube. So I'm thinking of bringing at least one a week on Saturdays like I used to, in addition to the live streams that we do during the weekdays. So let me know what you think about this tutorial. I'm thinking of going down more landscape painting, more of a landscape painting route. For years we've been doing portrait painting, but I really enjoy the immediacy of the landscape painting with watercolor, and I'm going to keep exploring it, especially painting on location in the future. So this is something I have really started to enjoy. a lot more recently. So hopefully you will enjoy the evolution of these watercolor landscapes. So let me know if you enjoy this in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. Remember, as always, if you want to take your online art education with me further, please consider checking out my Patreon, which is also linked in the description box of the video. The classes start at just $5 a month. And the best thing about that really is the Patreon Messenger. You're able to contact me anytime you like. There's tons of pre-recorded uh, video style projects for you to follow along for any level, beginner all the way to advanced level. So definitely check that out if you're interested. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I wish you all the very best, and I'll see you on the next one.